In a world of kings dripping with gold, of emperors on jeweled thrones, of palaces and luxury and the endless pursuit of wealth, there once existed a people who did the exact opposite. A people who were, in their own way, the elite of their world, free citizens of one of the most powerful states in Greece, and yet who deliberately chose to live in harsh, brutal, almost monk-like austerity. They forbade themselves luxury. They ate plain, deliberately unappetizing food. They wore simple clothes, slept on hard beds, and despised the soft comforts that other peoples craved. They turned their entire society into a single machine with one purpose: war. From birth to death, their lives were shaped by a system of training so severe, so total, and so famous that its very name has become a byword for harsh discipline. They were the Spartans, the warrior people of ancient Greece, and they are the great inverse of every story of wealth and luxury, a ruling elite who held power not through gold, but through iron discipline, and who built their fearsome society on a dark and brutal foundation. Today, we are going to live a day in the life of a Spartan and discover what it truly meant to belong to history's most extreme warrior society. Using advanced AI trained on the ancient accounts of Sparta, the archaeology of the Greek world, and the historical study of this unique and famous society, we have reconstructed a day in the life of a Spartan citizen. But first, you must understand the dark secret on which the entire Spartan system was built, the secret that explains why an entire people turned itself into an army. The Spartans were a small population of elite warrior citizens, ruling over a vastly larger population of the people they had conquered and enslaved. Sparta controlled rich lands, and those lands were worked not by the Spartans themselves, but by a huge population of state-owned serfs, conquered peoples bound to the land, forced to farm it and to hand over a large portion of everything they produced to their Spartan masters. These enslaved people, the Helots, vastly outnumbered the Spartans, perhaps by many times over. And this was the central fact of Spartan existence. The Spartans were a small elite sitting atop a massive, resentful, enslaved population that could rise up and destroy them at any moment. The Spartans lived in permanent fear of a Helot revolt, and that fear shaped everything. To keep their grip on this dangerous, restless mass of enslaved people, the Spartans had to be, at all times, ready for war, disciplined, organized, fearsome, and utterly dominant. And so the entire Spartan way of life, the austerity, the training, the discipline, the warrior code, was, at its root, a system designed to maintain the absolute military superiority of a small elite over the enslaved majority that fed them. The Spartans did not work because the Helots worked for them, and freed from labor, they devoted their entire lives to becoming the perfect soldiers because their survival depended on it. The whole glorious, terrible machine of Spartan society rested on this foundation of mass enslavement and the perpetual fear it created. Because the Spartans did not farm or labor or trade, the free Spartan male had only one profession: warrior. And the making of that warrior began at birth with a brutality that shocked even other Greeks. When a Spartan child was born, it was, according to the ancient accounts, examined by the elders, and a child judged too weak or sickly to become a useful warrior or bearer of warriors could be rejected, exposed, and left to die. From the very first moment of life, the individual existed only to serve the state. A boy who was allowed to live stayed with his mother only in his earliest years. Then, while still a young child, he was taken from his family and entered into the famous, ferocious Spartan system of upbringing and education, a state-run training regime designed to forge soft children into hardened warriors, the most extreme and total system of military education in the ancient world. From this point, the boy belonged not to his parents but to Sparta, and his childhood, such as it was, would be one long, harsh apprenticeship in toughness, obedience, endurance, and the arts of war. The training of a Spartan boy was deliberately, systematically brutal. The boys lived together in groups, away from their families, under strict discipline and constant supervision in conditions designed to harden them. They were given little food, deliberately kept hungry, and were actually encouraged to steal food to survive, a lesson in cunning, daring, and self-reliance, but they were punished severely if they were caught, not for the theft itself, but for the failure of being caught. The famous, perhaps legendary story of the boy who stole a fox cub, hid it beneath his cloak, and let it gnaw into his belly rather than be discovered, dying without making a sound, captures the ideal the system aimed for: endurance, secrecy, and the suppression of all weakness, even unto death. The boys were given minimal clothing, even in cold weather, to harden them against the elements. They slept on rough beds they made themselves from reeds. They were subjected to physical hardship, to fighting and competition, to harsh discipline and regular beatings, all intended to teach them to endure pain and fear without flinching. They were trained in athletics, in combat, in endurance, and in absolute, unquestioning obedience. They were taught to speak little and to speak with sharp, brief, cutting wit, a style of terse, pointed speech so characteristic of the region that we still have a word derived from it for clipped, dry, economical expression. The entire upbringing was designed to strip away the individual, to crush softness and fear, and to produce a man whose loyalty, courage, and discipline belonged entirely to Sparta. For the grown Spartan man, daily life remained collective, austere, and oriented entirely around the warrior community. Even as an adult, even when married, the Spartan man did not live a life of private comfort and family ease. He belonged to a common mess, a group of men who ate together daily in a shared dining hall, and membership in such a group was essential to being a full Spartan citizen. The meals were deliberately plain and frugal, the famous opposite of a luxurious feast. The most notorious dish was a black broth, a soup made of pork, blood, vinegar, and salt, which was reportedly so unpalatable that visitors from other cities who tasted it said they now understood why the Spartans did not fear death. The grim food was itself part of the discipline, a daily rejection of luxury and indulgence. The Spartan despised wealth and display. Their society banned or discouraged the use of precious metals as everyday currency, using instead a deliberately cumbersome and nearly worthless iron money, designed to make the accumulation of wealth difficult and to keep the citizens equal and free of greed. The Spartan dressed simply, lived simply, and prided himself on needing nothing. His days were spent in training, in exercise, in military preparation, in the company of his fellow warriors, and in the constant, lifelong business of being a soldier, for that was the only thing a Spartan man was meant to be. And Spartan women, remarkably, lived very differently from women elsewhere in Greece, with a freedom and a status that astonished and scandalized other Greeks. Because the men were so occupied with military life, and because Sparta needed strong mothers to bear strong warriors, Spartan women enjoyed a degree of freedom, education, and influence unusual in the ancient Greek world. Spartan girls, unlike girls in most of Greece, received physical training and education. They exercised, competed in athletics, and were encouraged to become strong and healthy, on the theory that strong women would bear strong children. Spartan women could own and control property, and with their husbands so often away at war or living in the communal messes, women managed estates and wielded real influence over the household and beyond. They were famous for their boldness and their sharp speech, and the ancient accounts preserve sayings attributed to Spartan mothers that capture the warrior ethic. Most famously, the mother who told her son, as he went off to battle, to come back either carrying his shield, victorious, or carried upon it, dead, but never to come back having thrown his shield away in cowardly flight. The status of Spartan women was, by the standards of the ancient world, extraordinary, and it was yet another way in which Spartan society was the strange inverse of the norm, valuing in its women the same strength, toughness, and contribution to the warrior state that it demanded of its men. And the purpose of it all, the entire point of the austerity and the training and the discipline, was the battlefield, where the Spartans were supreme. The Spartan army was the most feared in all of Greece, the finest heavy infantry of its age. Spartan soldiers fought in the close formation of the age, a wall of shields and spears, and what made them superior was precisely their discipline and training. Where other Greek armies were made up of farmers and craftsmen who fought when they had to, the Spartans were full-time professional warriors, trained from childhood, drilled to move and fight as one, to hold the line when others would break, to advance without fear into the chaos of battle. Their reputation was such that the mere sight of the advancing Spartans, in their red cloaks, moving in perfect order and without fear, could break an enemy's nerve before the fighting even began. The Spartans cultivated a code of absolute courage. To flee, To surrender, to throw away one's shield, was the ultimate disgrace, worse than death. The ideal Spartan returned from battle victorious or dead, never as a coward. The most famous moment in their history, the legendary last stand of a small band of Spartans and their allies against a vast invading army at a narrow mountain pass, where they fought to the death rather than retreat, became the supreme symbol of this warrior code and one of the most famous tales of courage in all of human history. This was what the entire brutal system existed to produce: warriors who would stand and die without flinching, the finest soldiers of the ancient Greek world. That was a day in the life of a Spartan, the great inverse of every story of wealth and luxury. A people who were the elite of their world and who chose to live in harsh, deliberate austerity, plain food and the infamous black broth, simple clothes and hard beds, the rejection of wealth and luxury and comfort, all in the service of a single purpose. A people who turned their entire society into a machine for producing warriors, who took their boys from their families to be hardened in the most brutal training system of the ancient world, who lived their adult lives in communal messes and military discipline, and who fielded the most feared army in all of Greece. A people whose women, by the standards of their age, were astonishingly strong, free, and respected. And a people whose entire fearsome, disciplined, austere way of life rested on a dark foundation, the enslavement of a vast population whose labor freed the Spartans to be warriors, and whose constant threat of revolt forced the Spartans to remain, forever, an armed camp. The Spartans achieved something genuinely remarkable, a society of iron discipline and legendary courage that has fascinated the world for thousands of years. But they achieved it at a terrible cost, both to the enslaved people they oppressed and to themselves, sacrificing comfort, family, art, individuality, and freedom on the altar of military perfection. They are remembered, above all, for their courage and their discipline, the warriors who would return with their shields or upon them. But the full truth of Sparta is stranger and darker, a glittering reputation for valor built on austerity, brutality, and the enslavement of a whole people, the great and terrible inverse of every empire that ever sought its glory in gold.